relax and use your hands to feel where the joints are and where the different cuts lie, and really just kind of let that direct you. And it's amazing when you do that. If you worry less and just really kind of get your hands in there and really look at what you're doing, it is actually quite straightforward.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep.
For many in the hospitality industry, food is much more than just sustenance. For Alex Herbert, it's always been a means of connection to the produce she uses and to the people she cooks for and cooks with. Alex, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Huck. And you?
I'm good. It's good to have you on the show. I've got a question for you straight off the bat.
Oh, what's what I'm here for?
You're renowned for bird, cow, fish.
Oh, no pork.
That's right. Where's the pig?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think it just, it's all about the sort of the phonetics and the rhythm of it. But I think it just sort of set the stream of thought. Bird, cow, fish, and then you could just keep running with it.
Yeah. Well, it didn't stop you from doing incredible pork dishes through your career. You've done all sorts of things, but some of your favourite moments, I know, talking to you off air, is cooking with people and sharing food, and you've done that so many times. Do you have any sort of stories where that sort of really touched you doing that sort of thing?
Like you say, there's been lots of times. So, luckily, the industry always has lots of festivals, whether it's the Noosa Festival or SIF or Crave or all those types of things, which were always about, obviously focusing on individual chefs, whether they be international or from Australia, but also lots of collaborative events and other events also, like Slow Food. We did a dinner at Bird Cowfish with Sophie Zalakar and Jared Ingersoll and Vincent from WA, WA chef, and that was to welcome Carlo Petrini to Australia. And that was pretty huge. And the four of us chefs had actually all been to Terra Madre at one point or another. And I'd actually just been the year before with Sophie, actually. And that was a very, very special event because we were collaborating together and cooking beautiful menu, which was all based on two pigs. We each had different parts of the pigs, although I did dessert. There you go, bird cowfish dessert. And that was extremely special because it was just wrapped up in so much more than just us or the diners or the meal. It was about sort of the importance of food and preserving heritage, whether it be the Wessex Saddleback pigs or foods that are grown, and that was really, really special. And also it's just lots of fun, and you get into a kitchen and cook with other chefs who are your mates.
It would take us back into the kitchen for that event. Was there pressure involved given you'd all been there and Carlo was here, and tell us about what it was like in the kitchen?
Yes. There's actually, funnily enough, and I sent it to Jared not so long ago, there's actually a YouTube video that was done of the night. And oh my God, I look so young, but I also look just so unkempt and stressed. Because, cooking for someone like Carlo Petrini, and the room was full of all of these other Sydney chefs like Sean Moran and Kylie Kwong and Matt Lindsay and all these people that it was just like, oh my God, talk about pressure. I mean, the worst, people talk about, oh, I hate cooking for chefs. Well, imagine what it's like being a chef cooking for chefs. It's like there's nowhere to hide. So that was amazing, but it was also just beautiful because the food all came together and everybody had their own different components. Sophie did a beautiful brawn using the hocks and the head and the cheeks and the trotters, and Jared did a ragu using hand-cut shoulder. Vincent did the porchetta. And so also just that whole, not only we were collaborating to put, different courses together, the fact that it all came from these two pigs that had been grown by Michael Croft, who was a heritage pig farmer, is a heritage pig farmer in the ACT, who'd also been at Terra Madre the year before. So there was just so many threads going through the room that everybody was connected in one way or another to, this other lovely thing that's bigger than all of us.
Take us through that process of collaboration with other chefs. Is it challenging, or do you just is the language easy with food?
If you mean organising the event with other chefs, so that one wasn't too bad because there was only four of us and I was one of them. So there was only, three other people. So that's fairly easy to manage. But I also did this event with Joanna Saville and Australian Pork, where we brought Fergus Henderson out to Australia. And that was in 2009, I think, as well. Yeah, it was in October 2009. And we did Bird Cow Fish did a special dinner with Fergus, but then we also did organise the launch, which involved Fergus cooking a couple of pigs with Margot as at the centre stage. But then I got 12 other chefs each to so that was a lot. That was quite challenging because it's funny, chefs cook and that involves recipes, but trying to get recipes out of chefs is really, really hard. Bless them all. And I talk about that because I am one of those people. So I know I've been at the other end of it when people have been going, oh my God, I wish you'd just send me that recipe. But that was amazing, and there was 12 of us, and it was really a tribute kind of to Fergus. And the idea was to do it was a barbecue, so the idea was to do this amazing big barbecue. But what we also asked the chefs to do was to cook a dish that was, also a dish that they had created on their own menus in their own restaurants that was inspired by Fergus and his whole nose to tail philosophy. And it was an amazing event. So how do you feed, hundreds of people out in the open down at Pyrmont? So we came up with this kind of concept that we had each chef had a table that sat 10 people, and each chef was at the head of every table with a little table where they would prepare the food, and they fed 10 people every 30 minutes over the course of 2.5 hours. So it was amazing. People lined up and they didn't know which chef they were going to get. And then every 30 minutes, or every 20 minutes, the table would be cleared and reset. And then another 120 people would be filtered through to sit down at that particular table for that particular chef. And they would cook that whatever that dish was that they were doing. And the dishes were obviously all pork. I did blood cake on sourdough with scrambled eggs. Jeremy Strode, bless, did pig's head terrine. Colin Fastenage did pig ear schnitzel. So you get the theme. There were all these dishes that were using all different parts of the pig, and it was just so special. It was exhilarating.
Who were the chefs at the time? 12's a lot to remember. It was a while ago.
So there was Jared Ingersoll, Matthew Kemp, Jeremy Strode, as I mentioned, Justin North, Marty Boats, Kylie Kwong, Warren Turnbull, Colin Fastenage, Paul McGrath. Remember he had Orchelan in Leichhardt, Lauren Murdoch, and Sean Connolly, and myself.
Wow. Well, they were chefs of that era, weren't they, really? I mean, they were the big chefs of Sydney. I mean...
That's right, but they were all there because they loved Fergus.
You had an event at Bird Cow Fish, as you mentioned, with Fergus. Do you have any stories of the time that you spent with him?
So when we were planning all of this, we word got out, and Pat North came by, and he said, "You might need this," and he dropped in a bottle of Fernet Branca to Bird Cow Fish for us to have behind the bar, because of course Fergus is famous for his nose to tail, but he's also really people that know him know that he likes his Fernet Branca, and he's got in one of his books, he's got the Dr. Henderson's cure for hangover, which is Fernet Branca and another liquor that I can't remember off the top of my head. And when we were actually at the barbecue on the Saturday morning, I've got pictures where Fergus is holding up the bottle of Fernet. It was Fernet Branca. It was a bit early for me, but it's a good digestive. And anyway, so that was funny. That was something I learned something about Fergus that day when Pat North dropped off the Fernet Branca.
Nose to tail cookery was a real feature of what you did. It was really using everything to the nth degree. Do you remember the first time you broke down a pig and what it was like?
I don't. Well, breaking down whole animals. And I can't remember the exact time that I first broke down a pig, but there's something kind of grounding about it. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, know where your food comes from, but to take it to that nth degree of knowing where on the body of an animal every part comes from, and the intricacies of how the whole animal is joined together. And I think the thing that I learned from doing it the first time and not being a butcher and actually not having had very much experience at doing that was to just kind of relax and use your hands to feel where the joints are and where the different cuts lie, and really just kind of let that direct you. And it's amazing when you do that, whether it's a pig or a lamb, or even when you're boning out a chicken. If you worry less and just really kind of get your hands in there and really look at what you're doing, it is actually quite straightforward.
That event that you mentioned sort of really sort of explored the whole sort of beast. What's been some of the cuts that you've championed over the years in the venues that you've had?
I've always used lots of shoulder and in terrines. We pretty much always had a terrine on at Bird Cowfish in Surrey Hills, and that was something that I really got into and made a lot of, and particularly when Colin Selwood, who's now got the Cottage Scone up Newcastle way, was working for me, he really loved that. So he kind of went to town on that and became my master terrine, or he already was a master terrine maker, but, he really took that to a whole new level. I think the cut that we did a lot of, which is quite funny because it's really kind of a prime cut, not more of what we used to call secondary cuts, but the pork loin, which I loved. It was very, very easy to do from a restaurant service point of view because you could do smaller portions of it. We always roasted it so that it was a piece for two, so that it didn't dry out and wasn't too small of a piece, or even larger pieces for bigger services, and then we'd just cut it off. But the thing I really got into when doing that, though, was the brining part of pork. And, of course, hams and all of that sort of stuff have been brined forever, and sometimes, adversely pumped. But that's when I really started reading a lot more about that, and particularly using brining recipes from Judy Rogers' book, From Zuni Cafe. And that just kind of, you take a good pig, like a good heritage pasture raised and finished on pasture pig, and then you brine it and then you roast it gently and then you rest it. I even did it last night with a piece of Malanda Park pork, and it's just like, oh my God, this is just so good, it's so good. And so, that excitement of taking something, essentially is just a pork loin, but then, with a little bit of love and a few different processes across a couple of days and care, it's just perfect.
You've mentioned a couple of different farmers there, and that was a real feature of your whole career, is connecting with producers and farmers. Do you have any stories of the connections with pig farmers at all?
So when I think it was probably around the time that, I'd met Michael Croft in Terra Madre, and we'd used his pigs for both the Fergus dinner and then, of course, the Carlo Petrini dinner. And I, was asking Michael if he could supply me with Wessex Saddleback, and he couldn't because he was really quite a small producer, and in actual fact he didn't need to worry about restaurants too much, although I think he did supply restaurants around the Canberra region. So I, you know, heard that Matthew Evans had moved to Tasmania and was going to be a pig farmer. And so I was like, great, well, I know him. I worked with him for 2 weeks at Paramount back in the day. And so I got in touch with Matthew and he said, look, I can't help you, but there's a guy down here called Guy, who is farming heritage pigs in the northwest of Tasmania called Mount Norman Farm. So I got in touch with Guy and it's just starting out and quite small at that stage, but we started getting his heritage pigs sent to us at Bird Cowfish in Surrey Hills, and we'd get different cuts, but particularly his ham, which we used in our Crooked Madams, and but we also used them on the breakfast dish. So instead of doing poached eggs and bacon, we'd do poached eggs and we'd take a fat slice of the Mount Norman ham and just pan fry it and serve it with the poached eggs with the Montpellier butter, which is traditionally, that steak butter, Parisian steak butter, and we'd serve that as one of our breakfast dishes. And so that was really lovely because we were really seeking out people that were doing something special, and it was a bit of a hassle. I mean, who gets their pork sent up from Tasmania? But we did, and it was really worthwhile. It was great.
You mentioned before about when you're collaborating and doing big events, the challenges of bringing everyone together and pulling it together. But take us to that sort of moment when you are sort of cooking together. How does it make you feel in being part of that process?
Well, you're usually pretty high on adrenaline, because there's usually either really important people sitting at the table or a lot of them, which means that you really need to be on your game. Look, I keep my youngest son has now gone into hospitality, and it's funny because I've been not cooking professionally for many years, and I've been in the corporate world and more in the strategy side of things. But he's 22, and his passion for not just, he's more front of house, he's more wine, he's doing his Wesset and cocktail making, but his passion for the learning around that, but then also just the fun of the family and the environment and that camaraderie and people working really well together. It's really reminded me, and it's really put a smile on my face and reminded me of why hospitality in this industry is so special, because the people are really interesting. They're really smart. They're really passionate. And so when you get a bunch of people together that share that same energy, you just bounce off each other, and it's incredibly sustaining, actually, and rewarding. It's like you're with your tribe.
Well, we've had you on one of our sibling podcasts, Deep in the Weeds, where we sort of meandered through some of your career and some of the highlights. But what were the real sort of pivotal sort of turning points that set you on the path that you went on as a chef?
Well, I dropped out of university and got a job in a cafe called Cafe Troppo in Glebe for working for Ken Bergen, who's gone on to be a bit of a hospo legend in a hospitality management way. But 3 months into that, I actually got I got offered a position as an apprentice, inverted commas, at Burrell Waters. So I never actually went to TAFE, but I did do, I did do 2.5 or so years there, and what can I say? Working for Gabe Bilson and Yanni Karitzis. I mean, that really just kind of triggered a chain of reactions where, first of all, I'd been introduced to food writers by my mother, who always had Elizabeth David and Margaret Fulton and Robert Carrier and, Julia Child and everything on the bookshelves. But that Brower experience and hearing Yanni and Gay and seeing the recipes that appeared out of all these books by Claudia Roden and Michela Hazan, and that really got my curiosity going. That's kind of stayed with me forever. But I think when you've worked in a place like that, and then you go and look for another job, or you've met other people that have come through, like Maggie Beer was at Burrell Waters And so I'd met her when she'd come to lunch one day, but then I went to South Australia after I finished up at Burrell Waters, and while I was there, I thought, I'll see if I can go and see Maggie. And then, yes, I got a job working with Maggie for the last 6 months or so of the pheasant farm. And then in that last month or so at the pheasant farm, Chris and Margie, who had Paramount at the time, came to lunch at the pheasant farm and offered me a job because I was moving back to Sydney because I was pregnant. And then Chris and Margie knew David Thompson really well. And so when Sailor's Tie was opening, so you can see it's just this, trajectory of circumstance and relationships that you develop that, I've been really, really lucky to just sort of jump those stones along the way.
Yanni Christus affected many in the industry. Well, tell us about his manner in the kitchen and what you took from your time with him.
Yanni is so calm and meticulous, and you can see that in, many of the dishes that he created and perfected, because he didn't just create a dish, he would just keep perfecting it. And that was the thing about Burrell. Unlike today, so many restaurants, there's a hunger for people to change their menus all the time, which is fantastic. But, at Burrell, we had 4 menus a year. It was pretty much, and so I remember starting off making a Bavarois, and by the end of it, I felt like I'd pretty much nailed it, but it did take 3 months. But yeah, and so I learnt that from Yanni. It's just like that whole, just constantly looking at it and seeing how you can make things better. A strong memory of Yanni would be, because we worked those long days and only 3 days a week, at 11 o'clock when, the final desserts would go out, the kitchen would be scrubbed or cleaned down and we'd continue cooking. But quite often Yanni would leave Liz to do any of the main course prep, but he'd be sitting there at the kitchen and repairing the mix master because he's an electrician technician, and, he'd be pulling apart these pieces of equipment and putting them back together and into perfect working order. That sort of meticulous attention to detail that he also applied to his food and cooking.
Bird cowfish had many incarnations, and your food's got this DNA in it that you can tell it's an Alex Herbert dish, but it's not sort
really?
of well, it's not sort of defined, and it's not a visual thing. It's more of an experience. As an owner and a chef, when you created Bird Cowfish, how did you land on the sort of food that you cooked and the direction you went in with the food?
It wasn't a conscious thought, first up. I think I'd worked with very, very good chefs in very good restaurants. I think probably the big turning point and influence on my own style of cooking was Maggie Beer. I think probably because she really wasn't concerned with how the food looked on the plate. That's not to say that it didn't look good, but she was absolutely focused, 200% on the flavours and the combinations and adding this little bit of this here to make that and building those flavours. So it was much more cooking on the go, so to speak. Everything just kind of evolved. So I think that really kind of took me back to that whole cooking food that just really tastes good. Yes, you want it to look nice and beautiful and present well, which has been something also, that I'd always, liked to do. And then I think that combined with Marty Boats, who as well, is just so flavour driven and taste. And of course, David Thompson. I think that's what drove me. And then I think as a chef, or even anyone, I mean, some people develop their dress style and stick with the things that they like, or, these are the books they read. And I think for me, my food or my dishes, probably had some, repetitive or constant flavour profiles and favourite ingredients, and, currants soaked in veg juice or tea soaked prunes or things like that just kind of pop up, and you go back to those ingredients and those flavour profiles that you like that potentially can define what your food starts to look and taste like over a period of time.
As you mentioned a bit earlier, more recently you've been sort of in the corporate world and looking at sustainability, all within food as well. What sort of lessons or advice could you share for those owning restaurants and cafes these days, sort of with the wealth of experience that you've had both in the corporate world and in the restaurant world?
Flavour often comes through being very careful about not to waste anything. I was making a mushroom sauce, or Joel was making a mushroom sauce yesterday, and I pulled out this little bit of leftover chicken from the day before, and there were the juices there, and I roasted the pork and added some water to the bottom so that it didn't dry out, and we just kept adding all of that back into the mushroom sauce, and it just tasted so delicious. And I just said to him, you can write a recipe, but in that recipe, how do you say, and take your leftover juice scraps from the day before, and it's not going to be there and people are going to freak out. So I think that whole looking at how you can use everything. I mean, it's being spoken about a lot now, and people are much more aware of it. But I think that's something that is forever present in the back of my mind. The parsley stalks, if they don't go in the compost, get chopped up finely, and they just make something taste better. From a business point of view, I think, from a business point of view, I think it's really, really important to know how to write and read a P&L. And if I'd worked for Ken Bergen longer, I probably would have been better at that sooner. But it's that fine line between hospitality and generosity and cooking beautiful food and not compromising, and being a sustainable business, and understanding, where you spend that money and how you spend that money, and your portioning, but also what you're charging for it, which is obviously the real challenge. What the customer's prepared to pay. So that's a massive challenge to navigate. But I don't think that. I think when you compromise, when you put the costs first and compromise the quality of the food and all that type of stuff, I think that's a real danger zone, because the ultimate investment in what you're cooking and providing won't necessarily pay off if it doesn't taste good and isn't value for money.
I know you're still involved in sort of big food events and all sorts of things these days, but more recently, you launched a platform online to reconnect or connect further with home professional cooks as well, and share your ethos of seasonal cooking. What's been that like? What has that been like?
Well, I launched it. I launched it, and it's kind of sitting there. It's a bit like my letterpress that I bought a year ago as well. It's there, and I am doing work behind the scenes that I really want to kind of keep adding to that. And we're talking about my website, Alex Herbert. But it's just there for me when I have the time. But yeah, I've been quite busy just these last couple of months doing, like you said, this big event organising and working on different food consultancy programs. So unfortunately, the paid work seems to always take priority over the stuff that you might want to do more, but you need to make sure you can pay the bills. But yeah, no, it's something that I really, really am passionate about, and want to do more. But it's really not just about the recipes. I mean, I think my thing that holds me back is Really, it's just another recipe. You know, how many more recipes does the world need? So I think what is kind of taking me a little bit long to get to is the whole thing about, well, it's all the other stuff. It's the stories and whatever. And, you know, I don't really consider myself a writer, so that probably holds me back as well. It's like, who cares what Alex has got to say, or, you know. But, you know, I kind of want to do it even if just for my own sake, just to, you know, relive the glory days.
we love what you have to say. That's why we've got you on the Crackling. Well, Alex, as always, it's an absolute honour to catch up with you. Look forward to seeing what these events are as they unfold, and hearing from you again. We'd love having you on the Crackling. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
No worries. Thanks, Huck. Bye.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.